everyone. Thank you for attending the latest in a series of public events by the Michael V. Hayden Center for Intelligence, Policy, and International Security. And we have a wonderful program for you this evening. I am Mark Rozelle. I serve as the Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University, where, by the way, we are celebrating the university's 50th anniversary, and we are proud to host the Hayden Center. Tonight, we have about 270 persons signed up from 24 countries, 5 continents, 25 states in the United States, and the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. And we are live on our YouTube channel as well. Many of you may know that the Hayden Center is part of a larger security studies emphasis in the Schar School, and that our International Security Studies master's degree program has been a top 10 ranked national program for 5 years running in US News and World Report rankings. And we are very fortunate to have many leading scholars and practitioner teachers in our International Security Studies master's degree program. And among our practitioner faculty members are Michael Morell, who is with you tonight, and the namesake of the Hayden Center, General Michael V. Hayden, who has been teaching in the Schar School now for 12 years. And Michael Morell just reported that he completed and filled out his exams grades for his class this semester as well. So congratulations on that. Okay. So now I want to turn over the program to the Executive Director of the Hayden Center, the former Director of the White House Situation Room, Larry Pfeiffer. Larry?
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that nice introduction. I'd also like to extend greetings from General Hayden. Unfortunately, he could not be with us tonight. He had another commitment come up that was difficult for him to get out of, but he said he will be watching the video of this event tonight as soon as he gets home. For those of you unfamiliar with the Hayden Center, we're here at Schar School, and our goal is to put a spotlight on intelligence and the role it plays in supporting policymakers. We do that largely through events with prominent experts like we're doing tonight. If you have not seen our events before and are interested in knowing about them first, as we plan them, join our mailing list, go to our website for the Hayden Center, haydencenter.gmu.edu, and scroll over to the right-hand side of the screen, and there's a place where you can put your email address, and we'll be sure to get you word on our events as they're getting ready to happen. Tonight's event, as Mark mentioned, is being live streamed on YouTube and recorded. It'll be available on our YouTube channel immediately after the event and for perpetuity. We are pretty active on other social media platforms as well, particularly Twitter. So follow the Hayden Center on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. And it's another way to find out about the events and to frankly join in and offer some commentary on things that are happening in the intelligence world and national security world. We're going to have time for questions tonight at the event. Michael Morell will start asking questions, probably about start asking questions from the audience about 40 minutes into the event. So feel free to start firing your questions at us. If you're on Zoom, you can use the Q&A tool. We are going to be monitoring that for your questions. We're not going to be closely monitoring the chat tools, so please use the Q&A tool. Keep your questions brief and in the form of a question, and let us know who you are. But if you wish to remain anonymous, click the little remain anonymous box in the question box, and we won't know who you are. So tonight, we're looking at Afghanistan. Just over a year ago, President Biden made the decision to end 20 years of active U.S. combat operations in Afghanistan and remove all U.S. troops by September 11th of 2021. Troop withdrawal was completed by the end of August. The Afghan government, unfortunately, fell very quickly to advancing Taliban forces. The U.S. withdrawal received quite a bit of criticism from many quarters. Chaos erupted around the airport as people who had supported the U.S. and its allies scrambled to get out of the country quickly and safely. And tragically, U.S. military and Afghanistan civilian lives were lost in the process. Efforts continue to this moment to try and save additional lives left behind, lives that have been subject to Taliban repression, torture, and very tragically, death for some. Fighting continues across Afghanistan between Taliban and forces that are committed to a more pluralistic government and society. Meanwhile, official U.S. attention has been largely diverted by the war that erupted when Russia renewed its invasion and occupation of Ukrainian territory 2,500 miles away from Afghanistan. We here at the Hayden Center thought it would be a good idea to remind everybody what is going on in Afghanistan. So to do so, we invited our special guest tonight to join us to discuss these activities and their implications. Major General Masoud Andarabi served from 2019 to early 2021 as Afghanistan's Minister of Interior. Before that, he served as Deputy Director General and Acting Director General of the Afghanistan Intelligence Service, the National Directorate for Security, having also served for quite a period of time as its Deputy Director for Operations. Masoud resides today in the United States and remains active in supporting anti-Taliban efforts in Afghanistan. Our moderator, as is often the case, is Michael Morell. He served from 2010 to 2013 as Deputy Director and twice during that tenure as Acting Director of CIA, which capped a 33-year career at the agency. Pertinent to tonight's discussion, he's the author of a great book, The Great War of Our Times, the CIA's Fight Against Terrorism, from Al-Qaeda to ISIS, which he published in 2015. He is currently a contributor on national security and intelligence for CBS News and has a program called Intelligence Matters, which is a podcast and a show on the CBS radio network. Tonight's event, in fact, will be repurposed as well for his Intelligence Matters podcast and radio show. As Mark mentioned, he serves here as a senior fellow at the Hayden Center, and he's been a distinguished visiting professor here at the Schar School for the last three plus years. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Michael and Masoud for what I am sure you will all find to be a very enriching conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Mark. Masoud, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. It's great to see you. I want to cover sort of three areas. I want to take a look at you and your career, a little conversation about your background. I want to have a conversation about the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban, and then perhaps most importantly, have a conversation about, where do we go from here? What's the way forward? But if we start with you, you grew up in pre-Taliban Afghanistan, but you had to leave when you were a young boy because your father was about to be prosecuted by the then communist government. And I'd like to just ask you about that. How old were you when you had to leave? Where did you go? What was leaving like? What was your life like in your new home? If you could just talk about that a little bit, I think it will help people understand some of the difficulties that people in Afghanistan have dealt with over the years.
Thank you, Michael, Larry, and Mark. I'm pleased to be here and have the opportunity to discuss Afghanistan and share some insights about what's going on. About me, I think I very much remembered my days when I left Afghanistan when I was 8 years old, back in August, when my kids are at the same age and we had to leave and come to US at this time. So yes, at the time, my father was working for the communist regime he was a prosecutor to get him. And then all of a sudden at night, we had to leave and seek refuge like thousands of other Afghans in Pakistan. At the time, a lot of Afghans went to Iran and some Afghans went to Pakistan, and I was among them. And then we stayed there. I almost finished my high school while being refugeed there.
So then you get an education, Masoud. In fact, you get a technical education, and you end up working for the UN. What were you doing for the UN? And I wonder if you remember where you were and what you were doing when you first heard about 9/11. And then when you heard Al-Qaeda take responsibility for 9/11, I wonder what went through your mind about your country at that point.
So I finished my 12th grade, and then I studied information technology for my bachelor's. That happened later, but in 2001, I was in Islamabad, actually. It was I nearly finished, just newly finished my high school, and I was preparing for the university. And I very much remember that we saw it on media, on TV, what happened. I think as Afghans, we ought to look at it from the collapse of Soviet regime. We thought after that in 1998, the US kind of left Afghanistan and could not worry about what is going on there at the time. And then the Taliban came, despite there was resistance against the Taliban, and there was also claims by different Afghan resistance figures that the Taliban are not meant into domestic focus. They are very much tied with Al-Qaeda and other terrorists, and they have international focus and international aspirations with the camps and all the preparations that was going on. So it was a shock. At the same time, we thought that this is going to be the end of the Afghan chaos, because the world has seen what could be the consequences of leaving such regimes. It was an unfortunate event. I wish we could have done it before 9/11 would have happened, but that was the reality of the time, and there was all hopes that we might see a new Afghanistan.
So you go back to Afghanistan after 9/11, and in 2010, you start working for your country's intelligence service, the National Directorate for Security, what we all call NDS. You start as an IT advisor, but you end up running the SIGINT group, and then the operations group, and then you become deputy director, and then you become acting director. I just want everybody to know that you and I were both deputy directors for our country's intelligence service, and then acting directors. So we have that in common. But you and I've talked, and there's a couple things that I found interesting in our conversation that I'd love for you to talk about a little bit from your time at NDS, and that's the politicization of intelligence, and the importance of liaison to what the NDS did every day.
Yeah, so I came to NDS as someone out of the Afghan government, as someone who have worked for almost 10 years with United Nations in terms of promoting technology for better governance. So at the time as I was hired to come to NDS and introduce technology, it was a very, very paper-based, heavily paper-based system, remains of communists at the time, an organization with such background. So there was a need for fresh blood to the organization and also introduction of technology. And that has brought me up to the organizational level. Was 4 years as deputy, and then for almost a year as acting director. So I think that was a very big turn for me. I was kind of hesitated to join the intelligence in 2010. But soon I realized that this is the work that you can make an effect, and really you can help your people. So that encouraged me, and I kind of invested further and made some significant progress in the hierarchy of the organization. I think with the politicization, in my issues of intelligence subject in 2018, my master's degree, I mean, politicization of intelligence was a big subject. And then throughout that time, and then after I went in the Ministry of Interior, I saw how much of a disaster could be the influence of politicians on intelligence. And also the countries that are new to democracy are more vulnerable in terms of politicization. I recall an event where the head of intelligence in Afghanistan, just 6 months before the collapse, like in the last 6 months of the collapse of the republic in Afghanistan, has reported about an imminent possibility of US announcement of withdrawal from Afghanistan. And in that meeting, all of a sudden, the politicians, at least one of them, started to say that to the president that, sir, no, this is not going to happen. And this is something that maybe wants to divert us from our efforts and standing against the Taliban and so on. and kind of throw it away. And also other incidents where the intelligence was indicating that we need to leave some territory well before the collapse or anything, because it was very hard logistically to be supported. But because of politics, those analysis was turned down and never actions were taken. So that kind of showed me how significant the impact politicizing intelligence would have, and kind of is a big lesson for new countries not to move towards that. And I think also in terms of the liaison, liaison classically one would call it the sharing of intelligence, but I think in Afghanistan it was different. We had several countries, UK, US, other countries of allies who are in Afghanistan, that our intelligence liaisoning was going beyond only sharing of intelligence. It had capacity building, institutional reform, infrastructure development, technology enhancement. So I think that's one of the forms that would certainly empower and strengthen intelligence sharing as well with those kind of liaisoning opportunities.
Yes. So you leave the NDS and you get some more education. You talked about that a little bit, and then you return to be the Minister of Interior, and you had been a professional your entire life, and here you are stepping into what is a political role at the end of the day, right, as minister. And I'm wondering if you were conscious about that, stepping into that political role, and how you thought about that.
I think I kind of saw the flavor of politics when I was the acting director general. As a career officer, I was there. It was expected that I will remain as head of intelligence, but because of my non-political bias, I was not chosen, and I continued to do. And then I came also to Ministry of Interior with the assumption that I will play a key role in reforming that ministry and leveraging the US and other international allies that were supporting that, and tailoring the ministry to be more effective with a lot of issues that it had in terms of management, corruption, and policing and law enforcement and others. But soon I faced with the election, and then I faced with the US peace deal and other talks, which certainly started to consume more of my times towards politics, rather than focusing on those technical reforms. So obviously, it's a challenge to get into the politics, but I think certainly the intelligence experience and security experience definitely empowers a person to be more active, or to be able to fight the battle of politics.
Yeah. I was a slow learner, Masoud. I want to ask you a couple questions about the Taliban's victory in Afghanistan, if I can. And I guess the most important question is that all of us, right, the Afghans, the Afghan government, the United States, all of our international partners, we spent 20 years trying to build democratic society, a liberal society, small L, democracy, trying to defeat the Taliban. What went wrong? Why did we all fail? How do you think about that question?
Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate. You already touched. I think we can easily talk about what we gained. Afghanistan was a different country in 2001 and became a different country in 2021 with the challenges we had in terms of elections, but still people turned out and voted for presidents, and health sector, education sector, millions, up to 9 million women and children in school and media. I think there was a lot that we can talk about and consider it a success. And also the capacity that built in this 20 years, the human capacity that exists even today, scattered, but exists. So I think there is a lot to talk about what we gained. But unfortunately, the sudden events has really turned everything into negative. And I think the disaster was as such that certainly would put a shadow on that. I think I would look at it from two angles: from Afghan politics and Afghans angle, the opportunity that we had with the 20 years of US investment and other countries, investment in Afghanistan, the money and the resources, the capacity, and the huge infrastructure opportunity, building opportunity that was there. I think our politicians was not able to best utilize that, or also miscalculate that this is not going to be forever. We had to step on that. Unfortunately, corruption has always been talked about trying to solve, but has never turned into an actionable element that could really stop it from root of it. So I would go to the Afghan side in terms of how we misused such an opportunity. But then in terms of the international, particularly the US, I think it was an important time that the US could have taken what it has invested in terms of capacity. A whole new generation of Afghans were coming to power, were coming to different ranks. The level of support was significantly reduced. The number of military operations, the military support, even personnel, was significantly reduced, which I think was all of a sudden a decision was made without knowing of its consequences. And then we can also talk about the external angles of how the US handled the safe havens of Taliban. It's very important. We have been attacked from outside of Afghanistan. The training center for suicide bombers and others were not inside Afghanistan, but unfortunately, there was no clear policy towards that. Even the Afghan policy was getting renewed every year. Once very counterterrorism focused, once trying to do some governance work. So I think there is certainly two sides that nobody can say that this was one person or one angle's failure. It was a collective failure.
You know, your comment about the attack from the outside. I met with President Karzai many times, and he always raised the safe haven in Pakistan and the consequences of that, which were obviously incredibly significant. You know, he always urged us to do more, and you know, we were not able to. We were not able to muster the political will to do that. Another question that I want to ask you, Masoud, is from your perspective, why was the end so chaotic, right? Why were so many people killed and injured at the airport? Why are there so many Afghans who worked for the US government, who had a right to get out, a right to get a visa, who were not able to, you know, who to this day remain in Afghanistan and in danger? You know, why was that so chaotic? How much of that was due to poor planning in the US? How much of that was due to the departure of President Ghani? Why was the end such a mess?
I think, first of all, the date which marked the collapse, 15th, would have not been this day if the President Ghani would have not left the country. No one was expecting that we will see Taliban in the city on the 15th of August if the president would have not left the country. And again, there was no intelligence indicating, nor by Afghan side, nor by US or other international allies, that there was a threat against his life. So it was a closed circle decision, an untimely decision that has kind of surprised everyone. But then also the fact that we Afghans have been hearing that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. This was a term that was repeated several times by Ambassador Khalilzad and other US officials that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. But I think once the US and Taliban made the agreement, there was very less appetite in terms of following or influencing what would be the next steps, which was a smooth transition. So Taliban kind of saw that there will be no consequences if we do not obey the discussions that was going on or the peaceful transition that was going on. They kind of thought that this is a free land that we can walk, and when president has left, so they walked in and marched. And then since a few months, the NDSF was kind of not finding a mean for the fight. So they also end up not fighting, as they were not knowing what would be the end of that fight. So I think these are the factors that I would see has marked such a chaotic event. And also the attack on the US soldiers at the time. I think I would take it, yes, it was claimed by ISIS, but recent attacks that we were following in Afghanistan, no attack of ISIS in Kabul was possible without the Haqqani group's local network support. I think that was the last blow that network has made on US, and then the Daesh made its claim.
Yeah, I've seen you write that you believe that elements of the Taliban were involved in that attack, and that's, I think, significant.
I think I have no doubt that the suiciders would not have been able to get in there without local network support of Taliban. In previous attacks that happened, where Daesh used to claim that we had clear intelligence that local elements of Haqqani or former elements of Haqqani are facilitating the tactical support. And I believe that that day was not an exempt. And as we see the proudness that the Haqqani group is making, even recently by the Minister of Interior, in terms of 1,500 suiciders who attacked and brought them this victory, that would hesitate to help one more.
Yeah. Masoud, I've seen you also talk about how few people knew that President Ghani was going to leave. In fact, I've seen you write that his chief of staff did not even know. Just let me talk a little bit about, how surprised everybody was about his departure.
I think it was a surprise. That particular day, the president's peace envoy, Rahimi, and also his chief of staff was in active contact with the Taliban in Doha and trying to get assurances from Taliban that they will not enter the city, and even asked the Taliban to make a statement that we will not enter the city. And at 1 p.m. that day, the Taliban even made a statement at that. And then, so that was kind of the expectation of the chief of staff and others, including foreign minister and others there, that they are going to see some sort of agreement with the Taliban, and then there will be a peaceful transition. And the president told his chief of staff that I'm taking a nap when he went and left him to go for lunch, and he was thinking that the president is going to take a nap, and then afternoon we will talk about way forward, when he heard helicopters flying from the palace and leaving the palace towards an unknown location. Even some who were in the plane did not know what will be our final destination. At least one account or two account came to that as well. So it was a decision, I think, that have marked the 15th of March, an unfortunate decision. The outcome could have been different with some sort of an agreement that could have been possible, which was very unlikely. But at least we would have all had time for a better evacuation or a better transition of the government.
There's quite a contrast between President Zelensky in Ukraine and President Ghani in Afghanistan. Just strikes me.
I think certainly a lot of Afghans will remember that and will regret that. But it will be a time that we would see what will be the history in books, the decision on this.
So Masoud, I want to ask you sort of some questions about where we are today. And I guess the first one is a number of people talked about a new Taliban, a Taliban 2.0, that this was not going to be sort of your father's Taliban. But it doesn't seem like it's heading in that direction. It doesn't seem like it's turned out that way. Can you talk a little bit about how the Taliban is governing and what life is like on the inside?
Well, Michael, I mean, a lot of people was talking. I remember during the U.S. Taliban peace talk, how different U.S. diplomats involved in the discussions were coming and assuming that there will be a different Taliban and some Afghans. But unfortunately, no, there's nothing called the Taliban 2.0. They are the Taliban 2.1, and obviously, the time is different. We have social media now. There are Taliban who wants to use these platforms to pretend a different image, to tackle some of the atrocities that come out, despite their huge restrictions on TV and journalists and others. But still, they are, from time to time, trying to show a different face. But the reality is that the Taliban are not committing to the commitment that they made, that they are not going to prosecute the ANDSF. They are thousands, I would call it, of ANDSF has fled the country to Iran, except the ones that came to US and in the West. And large numbers of them escaped to the neighboring countries. Hundreds of them has been assassinated, killed, tortured, which harmed. I mean, the least that they were, in terms of being able to work openly or walk or talk, that's not, I mean, that's not that's something that they are okay with. They are worried that they will be prosecuted like their other colleagues. So that is the reality of the Taliban. And also, a lot of several reporting indicates that the Taliban are actively giving Afghan passports to the international terrorists to kind of cover their support for terrorism. So if anyone claims that you have international terrorists in Afghanistan who are operating, in order to cover that, they have released passports for them, Afghan identities to hide that and not be able to go. And also, if we look at the Taliban's 9 months in power, nearly 10 months, how many terrorists they have captured? There was about 5,000 terrorist elements in Afghanistan. There was thousands of Daesh released from the prisons in Afghanistan. How many of them has been captured by Taliban? None. They're only prosecuting the NDSF and others. So these are all indications that they have not changed their decision on school, on girls' school. It could have waited a day, actually. They could have ended that end of the day. All of a sudden, in the middle of the day, they announced. That shows the power of the radicals within the Taliban in terms of decision-making. So I think there will be, if it's going to be a different Taliban, then we won't call them Taliban. It will be something else. And now, under the name of Talib, it's proved to be that it's only that Talib, with radicalism, with suppression, with against the democracy, and a very narrow look at Islam. That's what you would know as Talib.
Masoud, I first want to say to everybody watching, please get your questions in. Get to the Q&A in a little bit, but please ask your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom here. Masoud, I want to ask about those people who stayed and who are fighting the Taliban. Can you give us some insight into how they're doing, where that fight is, without giving anything away, of course, that would help the Taliban?
I think the ongoing struggle that I would see it, there is obviously the armed struggle is taking attention, but there is a lot of Afghans who are standing against the Taliban inside the Afghanistan or outside. I mean, obviously the women who stood has been severely pushed back by Taliban, and they no longer can raise their voice from within the country. But there are media, journalists, and others who are talking and trying to stand against the Taliban. And what I see inside Afghanistan, you do not see any structured movement of a guerrilla with a foreign back or something. These are the people who have guns and arms, and Taliban show up at their home and they say, give me your guns, and they give them what they have. But the tradition is that they will have one for their own security. And they will beat them, they will detain their parents, they will search their village, they will search women, which is very sensitive and rural areas, which results to people frustrating and standing against the Taliban. That's what we see right now in terms of any armed resistance against the Taliban. ANDSF officers who tried to but we have cases where a police officer went to Taliban and said, I'm ready to work. But then after a few months, he was detained, prosecuted, tortured, killed, and then handed over back to their family. So a colleague sees that that is the fate of someone who trusts the Taliban and goes, certainly he will use any mean to stand against them. And that's the level of resistance that's going on, and it's increasing day by day because people's frustration on the Taliban's way of rule and the captures and tortures that's going on is making them to stand. And I think the more time passes, if Taliban do not change, the more of that we will see.
Do you think it's possible that resistance could actually grow into a significant challenge to the Taliban at some point?
I think the Afghan people have stood on against these kind of aggressions. The resistance in 2001 was one of it, but that will not be something that I would say that Afghans is the only mean against the Taliban. I think we ought to stand against the Taliban and try to convince them for an election. Now they have in power, there's no need that a lot of bloods to be shed again in order to gain the power. The international pressure, the continuous focus of the international on Afghanistan and the Afghans to try to come with some sort of an agreement. But if we do not get to that, actually, yes, Afghans are suffering from Taliban today, but history will repeat itself, I guess. This country with the Taliban regime in power, forgotten by US and others, will turn into a problem internationally in the coming years.
So you said something very important at the beginning of our conversation. You talked about the US walking away from Afghanistan after the war against the Soviets, and how that was a mistake that we, the United States, ended up paying for on 9/11. So, I'm wondering to what extent you worry that history may repeat itself here. So I'm wondering what you can tell us about what's happening with both Daesh and with Al Qaeda. Are they reconstituting? What kind of how's the Taliban doing in fighting Daesh? There's been numerous attacks in Kabul in recent weeks, so it looks like they're struggling. And then the relationship with Al Qaeda, you talked about the giving of passports, to provide cover to them. How concerned are you that we may see either Al Qaeda or Daesh conducting attacks again outside of Afghanistan?
I think the indications right now is that there are certain, the way that the West is fighting terrorism in 2001 has significantly changed today. So certainly a lot of security systems and measures and processes has improved in terms of not allowing something like 9/11 to be repeated. But at the same time, the terrorism has also learned from this, and they are also advanced as we go on. I am looking at this year, next year, I mean, short term will be very hard to sell this concern, but I believe that leaving Afghanistan and allowing the Taliban to openly move without any consequences and then enjoy the way that they are governing and not saying anything when they ban the school, do not have any consequences when they ban the schools, when they banned torture Afghans, when they reduce media access and everything. Certainly they will come with a thinking that yes, we can increase our support and achieve that common goal. I mean, the Taliban has made their own Eid, if you look, like when Ramadan finished, nobody in the world has announced that this is the end of the month. Normally, everyone used to follow Saudi Arabia, but they did their own timing. They claimed that they are the leaders as after getting the confidence that they claim that we have beat the West as well. So soon, radicals within the Taliban will certainly say that this is the time that we have to again help our brothers outside of Afghanistan in achieving their objectives, and will be that, or even if there is a conflict occurs in any Muslim country, that will be the address that radicals will try to go to regroup and launch again. So strategically, I believe that this type of a regime would certainly bring a harm, and there is chance that history could repeat.
So Masoud, Suraj Haqqani, the leader of the Haqqani network, sits in your old office as the Minister of Interior. And I'm wondering if he knows where Ayman Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, is. I wonder if Zawahiri is in Afghanistan under the protection of the Taliban government. Do you have any sense?
I think at least he will have what I mean, I don't have exactly to know about that, but what I could at least claim that certainly he has his sympathy. He would definitely pray for his safety. He would definitely assure that anything they could do to help and protect him, he will do. He's still on US's hit list in terms of a designated terrorist. So I think that's something that we cannot expect something different. Publicly a week ago, 2-3 weeks ago, he praised the martyrs of freedom, the people who killed themselves, committed suicide attacks on Intercontinental Hotel, which killed a lot of international workers there back in 2014. He praised that, and he thought that the result of that is that they are in power. So certainly he will welcome any other opportunity that the result of it will be an international implications.
What would you like the international community to do? You know, if you could decide, what actions would you like the international community to take that would best help the future of Afghanistan and prevent the reemergence of terrorism?
I think number one step is to clearly convey to Taliban that they should not even dream about being recognized by the world as a legitimate force. And then certainly the Taliban should have also know that without them, the atrocities that they make on Afghan people, which doesn't necessarily have implications short-term internationally, that is being counted. I mean, the killings, the 500 or few hundred that New York Times recently reported, what the Taliban doesn't see, that nobody cares about those killings. They have to see tangible consequences of that. And that's what international community could make. Pakistan has been a long-term supporter of the Taliban. Now that they are in power, they have to assure that they use their influence and ensuring that the Taliban really change and work. And I think that's at the same time, I have us Afghans, we have to learn, we have two things to do. We have to learn why we did not leverage the international support, what was our mistakes, what kind of Afghanistan we have to come so that different ethnicities, different people from different angles of it, provinces of it, could live together, what kind of government we need, and what was our mistakes in there. So I think that will be our part as well that goes. But the fact that the Taliban will think that the world is no longer monitoring them because they are no longer an international threat would have severe international consequences.
Mm. So Masoud, I want to ask you two more questions. The first you mentioned early in our conversation that your children, when you left this last time, were roughly the same age that you were when you had to leave because of the communists. And I'm wondering, in your heart, if you believe that your children will be able to return someday to Afghanistan.
Oh, absolutely. I think the Taliban, the regime that they have and the way that they are right now will not have a long-term existence. Even if the international community does not see them a threat, which I believe they will see them as we go on, as they see their activities, as the ISIS and other terrorists get raised, they will also see it. But Afghans cannot continue this kind of governance. Certainly, Afghans will stand against them, or the Taliban will end up changing and submitting to elections and other means that any Afghan can return and go to its country. And I absolutely believe on that.
And then the last question I want to ask you is a tough one. How do you feel about the United States today? Do you feel the United States abandoned Afghanistan, or is that too simple? Is there a better way of thinking about it? How do you think about that?
I think certainly in terms of what has happened after the evacuations and the American people and the American military intelligence and even the government trying to help the evacuation, parolee and all those. So I think that certainly any Afghan will appreciate those efforts. But looking at what happened, I think we do feel that the US could have done it differently. We believe that the promise that was made to the ANDSF, to the Afghan National Security Defense Forces, was that nothing will be agreed with the Taliban until everything is agreed. But the moment US signed its agreement with the Taliban, they, after that, never cared about what happened, why the Afghan government was not making progress. Yes, there might have been a president or two, the president or two other people around him, who made those decisions. But I think the President Ghani became the president of Afghanistan for the second time when the US walked to his inauguration, because even the Afghan people were not accepting him. There was a contest, Dr. Abdullah. But when US walked, so kind of brought, I think US should have made more pressure on the president, but would also should have not abandoned Afghans with not committing to everything nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
Thank you, Masoud. Let's turn to questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with a question about the ability of the Taliban to govern. Do they have the personnel? Do they have the people they need with the skills to actually govern the country, to maintain control? Where does that stand?
As we know, the Taliban do not have any, they are students of religious madrasas, and they have announced that they will build at least 2 religious madrasas. in every province of Afghanistan. This is the school that very radical focused Islamic studies with a lot of suiciders that were coming to Afghanistan were being trained in some very focused madrasas. So there's no modern education in those madrasas that Taliban has been trained in. So no, that's why there is a very less chance of the Afghan economy being boosted again, despite its challenges that it had. The mines and others that we have is not there. And a lot of governance institutions right now are not functioning, rather than Taliban are trying to solve it based on those traditional local mechanisms that they have had with them. So they are severely lacking the capacity that could maintain a governance, and that implications of that are visible with thousands and millions of Afghans right now on poverty and lines of Afghan people coming for food outside the country. But the more time passes, the more of those consequences we will see.
Yeah. We talked earlier about how the Taliban is governing, but are there debates within the Taliban about how to govern, that the hardliners are winning right now, or is there basic agreement?
Certainly, there are elements within the Taliban that are in favor of more wider means of governance. It varies. Some are believing that we should start opening the routes so that to others that could join and make the government cohesive. But the majority of the Taliban, the core elements, fighters and other spiritual leaders of the Taliban who brought them to power with their fatwas of blowing people in tanks and killings, those are in power, and at this stage they are not allowing those others who are with some modern thinking that could succeed.
There's a good question here about the drug trade in Afghanistan. The Taliban, when it first took power, said it would take a tough stance against opium production, heroin trafficking. That doesn't seem to be happening. What's your sense?
Unfortunately, before the Taliban coming to power, the Taliban have turned into drugs and methamphetamine and meths, which is more complicated. I remember in 2019 with the Afghan and US joint operations, we destroyed worth of 63 shops of making those meths, which was worth $1 billion at the time. Today, when Taliban are in power, they are openly operating that. There has been some recent reporting about that, which is absolutely true. The Taliban has used drugs as mean of their financing, as well as one of their means of financing their fight. And today they are thinking to use that as a government, as a mean of income, which is certainly expanded, particularly in the south of Afghanistan and the east of Afghanistan.
And then a good question here about the Taliban's relationship with some of its neighbors, China, Iran. What's happening on that front?
I think, first of all, the Chinese primary, beside its economical aspirations on Afghanistan, the primary concern is ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic movement, the group that strives for freedom in China. The war in Afghanistan. Their first goal is to be able to tackle that. The Taliban has not handed over that to them yet, but at the same time tries to somehow convince the Chinese that they are no longer there. I mean, that's the passport kind of mechanism that they are using. But Iran, so both the region right now, Iran, China, Russia, Central Asian countries, they are observing of what is going to be next. So obviously, they're concerned about Daesh. They're trying to understand whether the Taliban will be an organization, a government that they could work with. What will be the relation, the fight of the Taliban against the Daesh? Well, because the Central Asian countries were worried from Daesh's influence in China from ETIMs. So they're looking if Taliban really has the capacity to stop them, or they're going to turn into a challenge for them. So they are kind of in process of evaluation rather than a particular acceptance or non-acceptance of Taliban.
So Masoud, it occurs to me that there's a pretty interesting irony going on with regard to Pakistan, which obviously used to be the safe haven for the Taliban, and particularly for the Haqqanis to come across that border and to find safe haven there. And now it's reversed, right? The Pakistani Taliban is now in Afghanistan, coming across the border into Pakistan to conduct an attack, to conduct attacks. So it's deeply ironic that that's where the Pakistanis find themselves now.
Yeah, in terms of the Pakistanis, I think the Pakistanis has used to maneuver within these type of terrorism or these type of organizations. So obviously, Taliban Pakistanis would understand that there is a close tie between the TTP and Taliban, the Afghan Taliban. They knew about those ties, and right now, despite Pakistan's expectation from the Taliban to harshly go on that, but they are not. But I think this is something that if Pakistanis thought could be a strategic threat for them, or they could not tackle it, they would have not paved the way for Taliban to re-emerge and turn into an organization that had turned and come back to the government. But I think the Pakistanis has long played with these type of groups of LT and others that they think that they will be able to tackle it, unless there will be a day that they find out that this kind of support or contacts with these type of terrorists would certainly be a strategic threat for them.
Yeah. Here's a great question. And we talked about what you think the Western governments could do to help, and what their policy stance could be. But here's a great question: what can regular Americans do to concretely help the people of Afghanistan, or those who were forced to leave Afghanistan?
I think that first of all, I want to thank the American people for supporting the Afghan refugees that are here, the Afghans. I know a lot of friends here in the US who are talking how different communities are supporting them and in adjusting to Afghanistan. So that's number one. And the two, I think the important is that the American people and should not forget Afghanistan. It could be it's a country that a lot of U.S. blood and treasury is shade up in there. There is despite the failure that everyone is focusing, there is a lot of good. The entire new generation of Afghan leaders in different sectors of life has emerged from the assistance of US and others in the last 20 years. So certainly focusing or keeping Afghanistan and the US foreign policy as a country that certainly could harm the national interest if it's left like that. And not repeat the 1998 would be something that the American people could ensure that their politicians should focus on, and also the Congress.
So we're at the top of the hour, Masoud. I just want to ask one more question, which is similar to the last question that I asked you about how you feel about the U.S. And this is a very direct question. It's do you trust the United States? Do you trust what it says? How do you think about that?
I think now the government, I mean, I believe that the decision that was made, there was not, I don't think there was a lot of military intelligence and normal Americans thought it was a campaign that made that decision. So it will be very hard to say not trusting the whole America, but certainly we don't trust the administration that made that decision with the Afghans.
Thank you so much for joining. Larry, do you want to come back on and close us out? But Masoud, thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I just want to say from 33 years in the intelligence community and 8 years out of it, but still watching the world very closely, I think that if the United States and the West ignores what's happening in Afghanistan, we are going to pay a very significant price. Larry?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Masoud. This was a very, very rich conversation. You were very candid and honest in your presentation, which I think we all benefit from. It's a region of the world, as you mentioned, where a lot of American blood and treasure was spent. And we need to honor that blood and treasure that was spent by, I think, committing ourselves to continuing to help the Afghan people who helped us as well. And as Michael suggested, we cannot ignore Afghanistan, because when we did that before, it came home here to America, and we lost a lot of innocent lives ourselves here. So wonderful for you to join us tonight and help us remember about Afghanistan and why it's important for the American people to remember. So with that, on behalf of General Hayden, thank you everyone again. Follow us on social media. Look for our next event. We're hoping to have an event the last week of this month before the Memorial Day weekend. So keep your eyes open for that. And with that, we'll close out the evening. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.